On the 3rd of March, 1871, in the freight yard below Dutch Flat, California, a 22-year-old woman named Sung Ah Lan was handed over against a passage debt that had doubled somewhere between Canton and the Sierra Snow, $400 she had never touched. The labor agent held the paper, the sheriff's mark on it, and every road out. Everyone in the yard expected her to be sold on again before the lamps were lit. Instead, a tunnel miner with a cracked lantern laid the deed to his own claim on the barrelhead and asked what her mother had called her. She had signed for 200. She remembered the number the way she remembered her father's hands, because she had read the contract herself in the shipping office at Whampoa, aloud, twice, while the broker drummed his fingers and said no one had ever asked to read it before. 200 against 3 years of kitchen work in a mountain camp, and passage on the Ocean Pearl. Then came the additions: bunk fare, blanket hire, water ration, a translator's fee for words she had not needed translated, $10 for the paper the fees were written on. By San Francisco, the sum had grown a second body of its own, and by the wagon road to Dutch Flat it stood at 400, in ink, in English, beneath a stamp she could not argue with. She had counted every added line as it was entered. She had counted them in silence, because the agent spoke about her over her head, to the men in the yard, the way a man describes a mule's teeth. In her sleeve, wrapped in oilcloth, lay her father's brass dram scale, the little beam no wider than her palm, which had weighed out gone cow and dried tangerine peel in a shop that no longer existed. The snow was starting again. Behind her, a wheel groaned. Ahead, boots came through the slush and stopped. Then a folded paper struck the barrelhead, and the whole yard went quiet, because nobody there could say yet what a man's only claim was worth against a woman's debt, or why he would offer it. The paper was folded in 4 and gone soft at the creases from riding a long while in a wet pocket. Nobody touched it. Snow came down in the loose, hesitating way it does before it means business, settling on the barrelhead, on the folded edges, on the shoulders of the men crowded into the lamplight between the store and the freight shed. "Read it, then," said Dean, who kept the store and the ledger and the only iron safe above the river. The broker unfolded it with 2 fingers, the way a man handles something he intends to find worthless. Solin could not read the English words, but she knew the shape of a filed paper, the ruled lines, the pencil pressed hard, the stamp bled blue at one corner. She had grown up among papers like it. Her father had kept the shop's accounts in columns straighter than the shelves. Notice of location, the broker read aloud, slowly, so the crowd would hear how thin it sounded. Cold Fork, north side of the ledge, 400 feet by 50. Recorded September the 11th, Book C, page 41. Owen Ballard, sole owner. He looked up. "This is a rock, Mr. Ballard. In the snow. You cannot pay a woman's passage with a rock. I've taken 16 ounces off that rock since August," Ballard said. His voice was low and unhurried, a voice used to being heard over water. "The assay's in Dean's safe. The claim stands good against whatever's written for her, and I'll sign a note beside it." Solin stood with her hands folded in front of her, because her hands wanted to shake and she would not permit it. She was aware, in a distant way, of the weight in the sleeve of her padded jacket, the small wooden case, worn shiny at the latch, holding the brass hand scale her father had used to weigh out medicines at 1/5 of a copper's worth. It had crossed the sea against her ribs. It had never once been out of her keeping. The figure, she said, the yard did not quiet all at once. It quieted the way a stove quiets, a shifting, a settling, then nothing. The figure, she said again, in the careful English she had been building since the boat, word by word, like setting stones in a wall. "Please, read the figure." The broker's mouth thinned. He had brought her up the wagon road with 3 other women and 11 men, and in that time he had spoken over her head in their shared tongue as though her ears were furniture, discussing what she would fetch, what she would cost, how a widow's hands were worth more than a girl's face in a snow camp. She had listened to every word of it and eaten her rice and said nothing. Dean hauled the ledger out onto the barrelhead, turned it so the lamplight fell. Dean hauled the ledger out onto the barrelhead, turned it so the lamplight fell across the columns and not across his own face, and wet his thumb to find the page. She watched the thumb more than the page. In the herb shop where she had grown up, the men who came to argue over a bill always touched the paper first, as if the figures could be persuaded by handling, and her father had taught her to watch the hands of such men and to keep her own hands folded. The tent smelled of kerosene, wet wool, pork fat gone cold in the pan, and the faint sulfur that never left the camp because the tunnel crews came down each evening carrying it in their clothes. Outside, up on the grade, someone was still driving spikes into a snow shed by lantern. 3 strokes and a pause. 3 strokes and a pause. 22 days from the Sacramento wharf and 11 men to be handed between, and in all that time she had been invisible in 2 languages. Her name was not in the book. She had looked for it and found her husband instead. Kwan Ah Lum, tunnel, deceased. And beneath that entry, in a newer ink, a line that gave her no name at all. Widow Chinese, 1. As though she were a shovel, or a keg, or a length of fuse that had come up the mountain with the rest of the freight. Hing, who had brought her up from the valley and who spoke her tongue like a man throwing stones at a dog, leaned in with his shoulder against Dean's and translated only the sum. $86, he said. You understand. 86. Your husband signed for the passage, and a dead man's paper does not die with him. She understood. She had signed nothing, but she had watched Ah Lum sign, 3 years ago, in the shipping office on the Praia, with the harbor stink coming through the window and a clerk sanding the ink. $40. She could still see the shape of it, the 4 and the round nothing after it, because she had counted out the same figure 1,000 times in her father's shop, weighing dried tangerine peel against copper, writing the day's totals by candle since the year she turned 11. 40, and now 86. Nobody in the tent expected her to look at the page. They expected her to look at the floor, so she stepped closer to the barrel and put her finger down on the ledger, on the 4th line from the top, and the men went quiet in the way men go quiet when a cat walks across a table. Board and keep, Sacramento, $9. And 4 lines lower, in a browner ink, thinner, as if written on a different night by the same hand. Board and keep, Sacramento, $9. 9, she said. Her English was still only the words she had needed on the water, and the words she had needed were numbers. 2 time. Dean's mouth moved before his eyes did. He turned the book toward himself, and then away again, and the lamp flame stood straight up and unbothered, while he decided which kind of man he would be about it. Interest, he said. Camp rate. Compounds. 9, she said again, and moved her finger down to the last line, where the column had been added, and set her fingertip on the total. She had added it in her head twice, while Hing was still saying 86. 82. Behind her, from the dark by the tent flap where the canvas sagged with wet snow, a man laughed once. Not a cruel laugh, the short, surprised bark of a man watching a wheel come off a wagon that had always looked well built. She had noticed him when he came in and then forgotten him, because he had done nothing to be remembered for. Big through the shoulders, drill scarred across the knuckles, hair flattened by a wet hat, the hard rock look of a man who worked underground and came up at dark. He had stood against the canvas for an hour with a tin cup he never lifted, and he had not spoken over her head, or under it, or at all. Dean said, "Bad arithmetic don't cancel the debt." Hing said in their shared tongue, low and fast, "Take your hand off the page. You shame me." There is a boarding house at Dutch Flat that pays a debt like yours in one afternoon, and the woman who runs it does not ask a widow how well she can add. There it was, the thing that had been sitting in the tent since Sacramento, finally put into words, and she kept her face as still as a bowl of water and let it go by. The miner came off the canvas. He put his cup down on the barrel, and beside it he laid a paper folded into quarters, worn soft along the creases the way paper gets when a man opens it to look at it, and then puts it away again, over and over, for a year. "Location notice," he said. "Cold Spring Ledge, above the second bend. Recorded in Nevada City, May." Put it against her paper. Dean looked at the folded thing without touching it. "A claim ain't cash." "It's twice her paper and you know it," the miner said, "or you'd have bought it off me in August." Snow began to hush against the tent wall, the first of it, early. In her sleeve, her thumb found the little brass weight from her father's scale and turned it, and turned it. The paper lay between the lamp and the ledger, and she knew every figure on it the way she knew the veins on the back of her own hand. $60, written in a clerk's hand in Hong Kong for her passage and her keep. Then the additions, each in a different ink, each in a different man's fist. The mat she slept on below deck, the rice, the water ration, the coat she had been given at the wharf in San Francisco, the mule that carried the other women's boxes while she walked, the 9 miles of grade from the rail end, the interest that grew like mold in a damp room. $122.40. Her father had taught her to read a scale before he taught her to read poetry, and so she had understood the arithmetic before she understood the English around it. A debt that doubled between the water and the mountain was not a debt. It was a rope with a knot tied fresh every week. Dean turned the folded deed with one finger, as though it might be warm. 1,800 feet of gravel on a creek nobody's worked since the flood, he said. Recorder's ink don't make it pay. Nobody's worked it because nobody could get water to it, Kell said. He had come in with snow already on his shoulders and had not taken off his hat, and he stood the way men stand who have spent years bent under low ceilings, a little forward, a little braced. I got water to it in September. There's a ditch and a flume and 40 rods of sluice, and you can walk up and put your hand on it in the morning if the drifts let you. And if it's worth twice her paper, why hand it over for a girl who don't weigh 100 pounds? That's my business, Kell said. Dean laughed and looked at her and spoke about her the way the men on the ship had spoken about the crates in the hold. She can't cook white men's food. She won't say 6 words in a day. 2 of the Sawyers have already asked what I want for her, and I've told them 150 because the paper runs. Kell, the paper runs whether she works or sleeps. By March, she's worth 140. By June, say the rest of it in front of her, Kell said, if you're going to say it. She don't follow. She followed the 150. Tam Yuet Sim kept her eyes on the ledger and her hands inside her sleeves, and in her left sleeve her thumb went around and around the little brass weight from her father's balance. One tail, worn smooth at the corners, the character on its face rubbed nearly away by 30 years of his fingers and now by hers. It was the only thing she had carried out of Sun Wei that was worth anything, and it was worth nothing here, where they weighed in ounces and paid in dust. She had used it once already, in October, when a Cornish boy came into the cook tent with his forearm laid open by a rock that had come out of a shot hole wrong, and the camp had no doctor closer than Dutch Flat, and she had ground her father's roots on the flat of a shovel and weighed them against that brass and packed the wound with the powder that stops blood. The boy still had the arm. Nobody had written that in any ledger. 9.5 ounces, Dean said suddenly, to the tent post, doing his own arithmetic. That's what the paper is, near enough. At 16 to the ounce, you'd sign away a working claim for 9.5 ounces of yellow. I'd sign it away tonight, Kell said. Dean pulled the inkstand toward him. He was a man who liked the sound a pen made in a quiet room. She had learned that about him, the way she had learned which board of the store floor gave under a foot, and which of the merchants would take her coin, and which would set her coin on the counter and push it back with 2 fingers without ever meeting her eyes. He dipped, he wrote, he turned the paper around, and he said, kindly, in the voice men use when they are being generous with something that was never theirs, then she's yours, and God help you through the winter. Kell did not pick up the pen. He turned instead and looked at her, really looked, the first man in 11 weeks to do it above the collarbone, and she saw that his eyes were tired and pale and not unkind, and that he was working up to something the way a man works up to lifting a weight he is not sure of. Ma'am, he said, they call you Mary in this camp. That's not your name. The snow hushed against the canvas. Somewhere out in the dark a mule shifted and the bell on its neck knocked twice. Tam Yuet Sim, she said. He repeated it, badly, and then again, less badly, and then he said to Dean without turning around, write it on the discharge the way she says it, and write it that the paper's canceled to her, not to me. Dean's pen stopped. That's not how it's done. Write it. I can't, Dean said, and for the first time all evening he sounded like a man telling the truth. There's a twin of that paper in a strongbox in Sacramento, and there's a second name under hers, and the pass closes tonight. Her thumb stopped on the brass. Mui mui. For a breath, the office went as far away as a room seen from the water. Mui mui, little sister. The word had no weight in that place, no meaning to the 2 men breathing over the lamp, and it went through Yuet Lan like a nail through cloth. She saw the wharf at Hong Kong again, the gangway sweating tar in the heat, her aunt standing back from the crowd with Yuet Ping's hand shut inside her own. The child had been 12 in the spring. She had a cowlick that no water would lie down, and she had cried without sound, the way their mother had taught them both to cry. And Yuet Lan had said, 1 passage is enough. You stay. You keep the shop shutters oiled. I will send silver by the 2nd winter. The broker's man had smiled at that. He had smiled the whole time, and she had thought it was because the sun was in his eyes. Give me the paper, she said. Dean's hand went flat over the ledger the way a man covers a card. "Now, this is a company document." I read. She heard her own English come out stiff and small and made it slower, so that it could not be mistaken for asking. I read it. "Give me." Trethewey lifted the lamp and set it down again nearer the middle of the table, which moved the light off Dean's face and onto the page. He did not say anything. He had a way of shifting the light that was more forceful than speech. Dean's fingers came away. Uetlan turned the sheet toward herself with two hands, the way she had been taught to turn a prescription so the writing faced the buyer, and she looked at the two columns her whole life had been folded into. On the left, the Chinese. A clerk's hand, quick and slanted, a river delta hand. Passage and provision from Hong Kong to San Francisco, $310, to be worked out in service, the term 3 years, the accounting to be shown to the bonded party each new year. Under that, the broker's chop in Cinnabar Red, Tong Fat and Company, and the date in the old reckoning, the 8th month. On the right, the English. She had learned her numbers before she learned her verbs, because numbers were what her father's shop ran on, and the numbers on the right did not match the numbers on the left. 620. Then a column of small charges written beneath it in a different, rounder hand, each with its own figure. Betting, $4. Rice and tea, $31. Inspection at the wharf, $6. Transfer, Sacramento, $12. Board on the road, $19. Interest, 3% by the month, from the day of sailing. She put her thumb on the brass weight in her pocket and slid it once along its smooth face, the way she had done since she was 9 years old, when her father would call out the figures and she would set the counterweight on the steelyard arm and read the mark and say the price aloud for the customer to hear. The weight was cast with the character her father had chosen for his shop, the one that meant true, and 40 years of thumbs had worn it nearly flat. 310, she said. This side. 620, this side. She lifted her eyes. Same paper, 2 prices. Dean sat back. He had a soft, patient face, the face of a man who had explained many things to many people at a table. Charges accrue, he said. That's how a ticket's carried. She left Hong Kong at 310, and she arrived at the mountain owing what she owes. Nobody wrote that to injure you, girl. That's arithmetic. Arithmetic, she repeated. The word came out of her carefully, one piece at a time, and she was surprised at how much contempt would fit inside 4 syllables. In my father's shop, a weight that lies is broken, with hammer, in front of the street. She set 2 fingers on the Chinese column. This one says the account is shown at the new year. You show me nothing. 29 days on the water and no one show me. She looked at the small red chop, and this. Under her own name, half a line lower, set so close to the fold that a careless eye would take it for a smudge, there was a second name, Chan Yuet Ping, age 12, and beside it, one word, surety. The room went very quiet. Down the gulch, the night crew was still working the monitor, and the water came up through the floorboards as a sound with no edges, a steady tearing, gravel going down the sluice 100 feet below in the dark. What's that word say? Trethewey said. He did not lean over the paper. He asked it of her. My sister. Her voice held. She was proud of that afterward, that it held. They put my sister under my name. If I do not pay, they take her instead. Trethewey stood up. He was a hard rock man out of Cornwall, and he stood the way such men stand in low places, head forward, as though every ceiling was a drift roof waiting to catch him. He reached inside his coat and brought out a packet of oilcloth, and out of the oilcloth a folded sheet gone brown at the creases, and he opened it and laid it down on top of the ledger, over the arithmetic, and smoothed it once with the flat of his hand. Uetlan could read enough of it. A recorder's stamp from the county seat, purple ink, 300 feet on the ledge above the ditch, the tunnel called the Wet Ivy with, the water rights attaching, filed the 11th day of March, and a name written across the bottom in a hand that pressed hard on its downstrokes, the way a man writes when he expects to be argued with. The lamp hissed. Rain had started somewhere above the roof shakes, not hard yet, the first patient tapping of an October that would turn to snow before the month was through, and the sound made the little office feel smaller than it was. The agent for the company store read the claim without touching it. He read it twice. Then he sat back and let his chair take his weight, and looked at the miner the way a man looks at a mule that has begun to talk. That's the Wet Ivy, he said. That's a hole full of water on a ledge nobody wants. It's 300 feet, and the ditch above it, the miner said. It's wet, it's mine. Yuet Lan stood where she had been told to stand, 2 steps back from the desk, her hands folded in front of her because there was nothing in the room she was permitted to touch. She kept her eyes down in a way that let her see everything. The ledger lay open beneath the claim paper, and though the claim covered the arithmetic, she had already read the arithmetic. She had been reading it for 4 minutes, upside down, while the men talked over her head. The collector stood by the stove with his hands behind him, warming his coat. He had met the boat at Sacramento and ridden up with the wagon, and had not once, in 9 days, called her by her name. He spoke now in the dialect of her own district, easy and low, the way a man speaks to a dog in front of company. "Don't get proud," he said. "He is putting a wet hole against you. Nobody puts good ground against foe, freight." The word he used was the word for cargo, for crates, for the barrels of salt fish stacked in the store's back room, and he used it without any particular malice, which was the part that sat coldest in her. The miner looked over. "What'd he say?" Yuet Lan lifted her eyes to the wall behind the agent's head, where a printed calendar hung with the days crossed off in pencil. "He says the tunnel takes water," she said. It was true, and it was not the answer, and she watched the miner decide whether to accept it. He accepted it. He turned back to the desk. The agent had his pen out now, tapping the barrel against his thumbnail. "Say the assayer looks at it. Say he says 400. Then I hold a paper on a wet claim instead of a paper on a woman, and I have got a great deal more trouble and a great deal less certainty." "Then say the number," the miner said. $362.40, the agent said, and he said it comfortably, the way men say numbers they have not had to earn. Yuet Lan heard the number go through her like cold water down the back of the neck. The paper she had put her name to in a room off Bonham Strand in Hong Kong, in the month the rain would not stop, had said $180, and she had learned to carry that figure the way a person carries a stone in a shoe, hourly, constantly, with a kind of exhausted familiarity. In 11 weeks, it had become $362.40. She had spent those 11 weeks in a hold, in a shed, and on a wagon bench. She had eaten what she was handed. She had bought nothing. "Sir," she said. The room stopped. The agent looked up at her as though a chair had spoken. "I ask you to open the book," she said. Her English came slow and shaped, each word set down separately, the way her father had set brass weights on the scale pan, smallest last. The agent laughed once through his nose and did not move, so the miner reached across and lifted his own claim paper off the ledger and set it aside, and there was the page, blue ruled, the entries in 2 hands, one round and one cramped. Yuet Lan came the 2 steps forward that nobody had given her permission to take. "Here," she said, "keep and carriage, Sacramento to camp, 18 days, $1 the day." Her finger did not touch the page. It hovered a ½ inch above, because she knew what happened to women who put their hands on other people's books. And here again, keep and carriage, Sacramento to camp, 18 days, $1 the day. The agent's jaw shifted. "It is written 2 times, she said. "And here, interest begins the 4th of July. The ship came into the bay the 11th of September. I was on the water on the 4th of July. I could not owe money in a country I had not arrived in." The collector said something short and hard from beside the stove. She did not turn her head. "The book is the book," the agent said. "Then the book is wrong 2 times, Yuet Lan said, "and the second wrong is $61. Rain came harder on the roof. Nobody spoke. The miner had gone very still in the way she was beginning to understand meant he was working something out and would not be hurried, and the agent looked from her face to the page and back, and what she saw arrive in his eyes was not shame. It was arithmetic of a different kind. He was pricing what it would cost him to be seen agreeing with her. He closed the ledger. He set both hands flat on the cover. "I'll recopy the account fair," he said. "In the morning. Clean page, no scratchings. Then we'll all know where we stand." The miner picked his claim paper up off the desk, folded it back into its oilcloth, and put it inside his coat. 9 o'clock, he said. "Bring the old page too. Pages get spoiled," the agent said. "Lamp oil, damp." 9 o'clock, the miner said again, and held the door. Outside, the mud had already begun to shine. Yuet Lan walked with her arms crossed over the front of her jacket, feeling through the quilting for the stiff square sewn into the hem, the Hong Kong paper folded in its own scrap of oilcloth, the sum in ink and the red seal beside it. She had not shown it to anyone in this country. She had not shown it to him. Because on the back of that paper, under the fold, there was a second name, a man in Sacramento who had bought the other half of her contract, and she did not yet know whether showing it would cut the debt in two or bring him up the mountain. She put the paper back where it lived, folded twice into its oilcloth and slid beneath the false bottom of the tin trunk, under her father's balance, and the packet of dried tangerine peel that had lost its smell somewhere on the ocean. Then she set the trunk against the wall, laid the quilt over it, and went out to break the ice on the water bucket, because the first week of October had come down off the peaks in the night and left frost standing in the wheel ruts like sugar. The claim lay along a bend of the creek where the gravel ran blue under the tailings, and the men were at the sluice by the time the light reached the water. Mei Yin fed them first. Barley boiled soft with a knuckle of salt pork, a handful of dried mustard greens she had begged from the cook at the Chinese camp 3 miles down, ginger shaved thin enough to curl. Owen Nance, who had come from Cornwall by way of 4 other camps, ate standing, hat on, and said the same thing every morning, that it tasted of nothing he could name, and he would fight any man who took his bowl. The young one they called Dell ate sitting on the woodpile with his boots steaming. Elias Rowe ate last and slowest, elbows on his knees, watching the head of the sluice like a man expecting it to say something. She had learned the shape of his silences. This one had a paper in it. He brought it out after, from the inside of his coat, the account from Pike's store at Bell's Crossing, 4 inches of figures in a clerk's slanting hand, the total underscored twice. Powder, fuse, a coil of hose, 2 flasks of quicksilver, flour, beans, coffee, lard, $1.40 for a file, $62.80 against a poke of dust he had carried down on Tuesday. Pike says I'm shy, Elias said. Says the dust ran light. Mei Yin took the paper. She could not read every word yet, but numbers had never needed translating. Her father had kept accounts in the herb shop in Sam Shui for 31 years, and she had ruled his columns from the age of 9, and the shape of a false column was the same in any country, too neat in the middle, too crowded at the foot. "Where is the rest?" she asked. He gave her the poke. She loosened the thong, tipped a little into her palm, and felt the weight the way a woman feels the weight of a child. "Wait," she said. She went in for the balance. It was the length of her forearm, a bone beam gone yellow with handling, 1 small brass pan, 3 weights in a wooden box worn smooth at the corners, 1 tail, 1 mace, 1 candarine. Her father had weighed musk and pearl powder and the dust of antler on that beam. On the boat, a Portuguese steward had taught her that a tile was 1 1/3 ounce, and she had written the figure inside the box lid with a pin, and she had checked it against every scale she had been near since, the way other people checked a door. She weighed what was in front of her, because weighing was the only way she knew how to be still. A copper coin with a square hole, a brass thimble, 3 curls of dried tangerine peel in oiled paper, which came to 2 candarines and a little, the same as they had come to in her father's shop in Foshan when she was 9 years old and had to stand on a stool to read the beam. A pinch of coarse salt lifted from the cook tent, because Salt was honest and told her whether the pivot had bent in the wagon. It had not bent. The beam still hung true, the little brass pan swinging and settling like a bird deciding on a branch, and Saleen sat on an upturned nail keg in the dark of the laundry lean-to at Wager Bar and watched it settle, and her breathing slowed to match it. In the morning the bookman came with the ledger under his arm the way a priest carries a book, and read her figure out loud in the yard so that the men waiting for their shirts could hear it. $60 for the passage from Hong Kong. $4 for the doctor at the wharf who had looked at her tongue for the length of a breath and signed a paper she never saw. $2, the interpreter's fee for reading that paper to her, though nobody had read it to her. $9 for the steamer up from San Francisco and the wagon over the divide, and $1.50 for the blanket she had slept under on the wagon, and $3 for the mule that carried the trunk, and $11 for board across 4 weeks that had not happened yet, and interest at 4 in the 100 each month, counted from the day the boat left the Pearl River, and counted again each month upon itself, so that the sum ate and grew fat while she was still on the water. $142.60. Her debt had doubled before her feet ever touched the mud of this camp. "You understand the number," Sung Kai said, not as a question. "I understand the number," Saolin said. Her English came out level and formal, each word set down separately like coins on a counter. "I ask, please, what is the word for money that grows while I sleep?" Sung Kai looked at her for a moment, and then wrote something in the margin, and did not answer, and that was answer enough. The other line in that ledger, on the facing page, was Jory Penrose's. She had seen it once, upside down, and had read the numbers even upside down, because numbers were the one language nobody had been able to keep from her. Blue Fork Claim, the drift and the wing dam on the North Fork above Wager Bar, pledged against the sum of the woman's contract, to be surrendered whole to the store of Ottinger and Company on the last day of October if the sum stood unpaid. He had put down the only thing he owned in the world so that the men from the coast would take their hands off her sleeve, and he had done it in front of 9 witnesses in the store, with his hat still on, and had walked out into the rain without looking at her, which she had understood later was because he did not want the camp to think he had bought a wife. 9 days remained. She counted them the way she counted grains. On the Friday, she carried the dinner pails up to the assay office, because the boy who usually carried them had a boil on his heel, and she was in the corner with the pails still hot against her wrist when Penrose came in with his week's wash in a leather poke, snow melt still shining on his shoulders. Cobb ran the assay and bought the dust and held the express agency besides, so that in Wager Bar he was the scale, the bank, and the road out, all in one man with ink on his cuff. He tipped the poke onto the horn scoop, blew off a breath of black sand, and set the gold on the pan. She watched his hand go to the weights. Little brass drums in a fitted case, nested, worn bright at the tops from 40,000 liftings. 2 ounces, then a half, then the small flat squares of the grains. 4 ounces 9 pennyweight, Cobb said. Call it $88 less the melting. Penrose said nothing about it. He signed, and the $88 never touched his hand at all. It went in a column against Ottinger's column, and the 2 columns stood side by side and did not shorten each other nearly enough. Solin set the pails on the bench and looked at the beam of Cobb's scale while the 2 men talked about the weather coming down off the summit, and what she saw was that when he lifted the poke away, the pointer did not go home. It came to rest 1 hair to the left of center, and stayed, patient as a lie that had been told so long it had grown comfortable. That night she waited until the assay office window went dark, and the boy Albie came down to the laundry for the shirt she had turned the collar on. 12 years old, all wrists, and he had learned in 3 weeks to say, tail, correctly, with the flat first sound, which no grown man in the camp had troubled to do. Albie, she said, in the case, the weights of brass. You clean them? Every Sunday, with chamois. You can carry 2 here, 1 hour, then back. He went white around the mouth. That's Mr. Cobb's. 1 hour, she said. You watch me. I do not open. I do not scratch. You carry them back yourself in your own hands. He brought the 2 ounce and the 1 ounce drums in his cap at 8 o'clock, and she set her father's beam on the flour barrel and lit the second candle, and did the arithmetic she had done 1,000 times in a shop that smelled of angelica root and dust. 1 tail was 1 ounce and a third. 3 tails, then, should sit level against 4 ounces of any honest brass in the world. She hung the tails. She hung Cobb's brass against them. Cobb's side went down and kept going down, and she had to lay on a mace and then half a mace and then 2 candarines before the pointer came home. And when it came home, she sat back on the keg and put both hands flat on her knees. 1/20th of every poke, every week, for however many years, skimmed off before the number was ever written down, and written down in the same ledger that was eating her. Albie was watching her face. Is it wrong? He whispered. It is wrong, she said. And then she heard the thing that emptied her chest, because knowing was not the difficulty, and never had been. In this country her mouth was not a witness. She had heard it said plainly in the store by the deputy, in the flat voice men use for reciting a rule they are proud of, that a person of her kind could not swear against a white man in any court in the state of California. Not in Sacramento, not in the county seat, not in the little pine room above the express office where the justice heard claims on Thursdays with his coat off. Her tongue could carry water, food, medicine, thread. It could not carry a fact across a courtroom floor. She sat on the keg a long while with her hands flat on her knees and let the wall be a wall. Behind the canvas, the creek went on moving stones. Somewhere up the gulch, a monitor hissed and cut, and the mountain gave up another skin of gravel to men who would be short-waited for it on Saturday and never know. Knowing had never been the hard part. Her father used to say that a physician who could name a poison and not measure it was only a rumor with a beard. The measuring was the thing. The measuring, and the sealed brass that could be set on any counter in any town, and would say the same number in any language. She lifted her head. "Albie," she said, "come here. Bring the lamp." The boy came. He was 10, all wrists, and he had learned in 3 months to be quiet inside her tent the way he was quiet in church, without being told. He set the lamp on the flower box and knelt. From the oilcloth beneath her bedroll she drew out the half sheet of her contract, the torn half, the one with her passage sum and the doubling written in a clerk's confident hand, the paper that had followed her across an ocean and up a mountain and had eaten 11 months of her life. She turned it over. The back was blank. Good paper, rag paper, made to last, made to outlive her. "You will read me the daybook numbers," she said, "every night. The name, the weight the man says out loud at the scale, and the weight the pen writes. I will keep them here." Albie looked at the blank side of her debt. On that, on that. She ground her ink that night the way her mother had ground it. Water added a thumb's worth at a time, until the stick moved with a whisper instead of a scratch, and she ruled the columns with the flat of her needle case. 9 names, 9 announced weights, 9 written weights. She wrote the difference in the last column and did not need the abacus for it, though she used the abacus anyway, because her father had also said that a number you have not touched twice is a guess wearing good clothes. 1 part in 20, 9 times 1 part in 20, and on the poke belonging to the old Cornishman who ran the upper drift, 1 part in 10, because a heavy man who has been paid badly for 30 years believes the scale before he believes his own arm. When the miner came down at dusk with his boots full of creek, she had the sheet weighted flat with 2 stones and the lamp trimmed low, and she did not say good evening. She turned the paper toward him and put her finger on the last column and waited while he read it, moving his lips slightly, which he did with numbers and never with words. He straightened. He looked at the ridgeline above the tent for a moment, where the sky had gone the color of a bruise and the first thin cold of October was walking down through the pines. "That's $400 a season out of this gulch," he said. "Maybe 5. More," she said. $431 from these 9 men in 11 weeks. Only these 9, only the weeks the boy could read. "You can't say it," he said, not cruelly. He had heard the deputy in the store, same as she had. He had been standing by the nail kegs with his hat in his hand while the rule was recited to her the way a man recites his own good luck. "My mouth is not a witness," she said. She had practiced the sentence and it came out level. "Brass is." He was still a moment. Then he sat down on the ground beside the flower box, which he had never done before, and put out his hand, and she gave him what he was reaching for, the small stamped weight he had been carrying in his vest since the night she set her father's balance on the plank between them, and showed him what a true 1/10 of an ounce looked like. Bone beam, silk cord, brass pan the size of a plum, the seal of the guild in Guangzhou pressed into the case in wax that had cracked but had never come away. He had checked that weight against every scale in the camp, the way other men check a door before sleeping. He had never once said aloud what he found. "Brass has no country," she said. "A scale that reads a stamped ounce short reads it short for the judge also. They'll say the weight's shaved, then it must be weighed against a weight that is not ours." She turned the sheet over, showing him the ink side, the side that owned her. "The express office in Dutch Flat keeps a set for the company. Sealed, a clerk signs for them." He looked at her for long enough that she heard the creak again. "You want a white man to carry your arithmetic," he said. "I want a white man to carry his own gold," she said. "To Dutch Flat. To weigh it on his own scale, in front of a clerk who is not from here, and then to bring it up the hill and lay it on the assayer's scale in front of 6 men, and to say one sentence." She reached for the second sheet, the one she had ruled that afternoon and had already written out twice to get the letters even. She had learned the letters from the labels on tins and from Albie's copybook, and from the deputy's notice on the store wall about lodgers. She held it out. "He will say this. I have weighed this myself." He took the sheet. His thumb went over the words the way a man tests a joint. "That's your hand," he said. That is his sentence. Because they could bar her mouth, and they had, in a flat, proud voice among the coffee sacks, but no rule in the county forbade a woman from being right on paper, and no clerk in Dutch Flat had ever been ordered to weigh gold differently on account of who had counted it first. He staked more than the sentence, and they both knew it. Her paper had a note under it now, and the note had his claim behind it, the whole ground, the flume, the 4 years he had gone without a winter coat to hold it, pledged against her sum, callable on 30 days by the man who kept her contract. Any week that man decided she had become expensive, he could call it. and the mountain would go with her, so they worked quietly. The Cornishman first, because he was owed the most, and because he had a temper that could be aimed. Then two brothers from the lower bar who spoke more Cantonese than English, and who would not be believed either, but whose gold would. On Wednesday, Albie did not come to the woodpile at the hour he always came. At the hour after that, someone came instead, and stopped in front of her tent, and stood there without speaking, long enough for her to see the shape of a man against the canvas, and the shape of what he held out in his palm, small and square and brass. She did not open the flap at once. She dried her hands on the rag at her waist, because hands that shook were no use to anybody, and she made herself say the sentence she had practiced against exactly this kind of hour. "Who is there, please?" The canvas lifted. It was the man from the water cart, the one from the grade crew whose forearm she had dressed in October, when the steam from a leaking boiler had taken the skin off it in a sheet, and who since then had left a fish on her chopping block every payday without ever once knocking. He did not come inside. He held out his palm and let the lamplight fall into it, and she saw the brass square properly then, a tag no bigger than two of her fingernails, stamped with a number and the letters of a district she had learned to read before she had learned to read the word. Flower. She had seen that tag nailed to a cedar post with two square-headed nails at the top of the ravine. She had watched a man's thumb move over it while he talked about water rights, the way other men touched a charm. The upper shaft, the water cart man said, in the language that cost her nothing. A shot went off early. The fuse was wet in the middle and dry at the end, and he was still in the hole when it took. She heard the river working the sluice below the camp. She heard her own blood. "He is dead," she said. "He was talking an hour ago. They carried him down to the shed by the snow fence, and the boy is in there with him, holding the lamp, which is why the boy did not come for the wood." The man turned his hand so the tag slid an inch toward her. "He said to bring you this so you would come. He said if you did not come, you should keep it anyway." She took it. It was warm from another man's fist and cold underneath that, the way brass is, and it weighed almost nothing, and it weighed the whole mountain. Then she stopped being a woman standing in a doorway and became her father's daughter in a shop on a street in Sun Wee, where a man once came in at midnight with his hand wrapped in his own shirt, and her father had not asked a single question until the bleeding had been answered. Grief could wait outside in the mud. She knelt at the crate that served as her medicine chest and worked by feel, the stoppered jar of tinchat. Root she had ground fine and kept sealed because it was the difference between a bruise and a burial. Pine honey traded off a Swede for 4 days of washing, a twist of paper holding the yellow root that would not let a wound turn sweet and rotten, the flat tin of needles, strips of cotton boiled and dried and folded, which the camp thought was vanity, and which she thought was arithmetic. Last, the little balance with the bone beam and the brass pan, in its lacquered case, the only thing she had carried the whole way from that shop, the only thing the men at the ticket table in San Francisco had not thought worth taking, because it weighed grams and not gold. Outside, the wind had turned and come down off the summit, and it had winter in the front of it. Snow within 2 days. Every man in camp knew it, and every man had his own arithmetic about it. Some of them worked the cut until dark to prove the pass would hold another week. Some packed out that same afternoon for Dutch Flat with their blankets rolled and their pans strapped, calling it prudence and meaning fear. The rest stayed because they had nowhere below to go, and because the man who had put his claim against her debt did not pack a single thing, and men in a camp watch one another the way sheep watch the one sheep that keeps its head up. She had told him 2 days. She had read it in the smoke, which lay down flat over the tents that morning and would not climb, and in the pitch on the split pine that wept faster than it should have, and in the way the small gray birds came off the ridge and worked the low ground close to the ditch. He had not asked her how she knew. That was the thing she kept turning over in her hands afterward, in the way a person turns a coin they have not yet spent. He had heard her say 2 days, and had gone straight out and doubled the woodpile and moved the powder into the dry cache and said nothing about it to anyone. The snow came on the second night. It came without wind at first, fat and slow, filling the ditch and the wheelbarrow tracks and the black scar of the diggings until the whole cut looked like something forgiven. Then the wind found it. For 4 days the camp lived inside a white noise, and on the 4th day the ridge above the drift mouth let go a slab of it that took the corner off the cook tent and 2 men off their feet. One came out with a collarbone snapped like kindling, the other came out with a shore timber's broken end driven through the meat of his thigh, and the hole in him was the exact shape of the thing she had spent a lifetime being taught to fear, ragged and dirty and deep. The company surgeon was at Gold Run and the pass was shut. She worked on that man for 9 days. She boiled water until the stove roared and the tent sweated. She opened the twist of paper and ground the yellow root and packed it where the wound wanted to close over its own filth, and she changed the folded cotton strips 4 times a day, and she put the fine needles in above the knee and below the hip until the leg let go of its clenching and the man slept. The powder man's boy held the lantern for her, 7 years old, kneeling in the wet, and she taught him to say the name of the root, Huang Lian, and he said it back with the tone wrong, and she let it stand, because he had said it at all. Outside the canvas, the men who had once stood in the street and recited to her, slowly, as though to a child, the rule that a person of her kind could not swear against a white man in any court. Those men took turns bringing her snowmelt and split wood, and stayed where she could call them. The wound did not turn, it closed pink and mean and honest. The man kept the leg, and by the thaw he was standing on it, poorly, leaning on a peeled fir pole he had cut for himself, swearing at the mud in 2 languages and getting one of them almost right. The debt was paid in June, out of the tin box under her cot rather than out of the claim, bark and powders, splints, babies turned in the night, 40 cents here, $1 there, sometimes a sack of flour instead of coin. The store sold to her that summer at the counter price. The clerk wrote her name in the ledger, the shape of it uncertain and the sound of it correct, and she watched his pen move and said nothing, because she had learned by then which silences were victories. The claim paper went back into its tin under the floorboard. Her father's brass scale hung by the doorframe where the morning found it, both pans trembling faintly whenever the ore carts went by. In August, the boy came running up the grade to tell her the root's name, tone and all. Exactly right. She set down the pestle. Then she made him say it once more, so the man in the corner could hear it too.